consciousness returned slowly. Whatever she'd been injected with must still be running through her veins. Her body felt light and floaty, and an unnatural calmness seeped through her. Even remembering everything she'd, remembered, didn't break the veneer of tranquility. She opened her eyes to the familiar ceiling of her room. Chiaki instinctively glanced to her right, and, yep, there was Kamakura-kun, sitting in his chair, one foot on the frame, arm across the knee, eyes on her. It was almost like she'd gone back in time to the moment she'd woke from her coma. Except this time, she knew the full story.
You helped her.
There was no need to elaborate on who her was. Chiaki wished she could have filed her words into an accusatory edge, but she was just so tired. They came out sad instead. His response was immediate and unapologetic. Yes.
Why?
He was silent for so long that she'd started to think he wasn't going to respond. Eventually, though, he spoke, voice low. She offered a way to escape my boredom. Chiaki squeezed her eyes shut. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. She knew Kamakura-kun was perpetually bored and hated it more than anything, in a way she would never really be able to understand. She knew his apathy caused him to be detached to almost everything, exempting her. She knew these things probably had a hand in his decision to do nothing as society crumbled. She'd accepted all of this, and while she wasn't angry, it was still difficult to hear. An awful thought occurred to her, and even through the sedative, she felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She opened her eyes, but couldn't bring herself to look at him. The pattern of the wallpaper was very interesting after all.
Then, was saving me something she wanted? Was all this some kind of plan of hers? To keep me alive so she can, laugh at—
No! His voice was unusually sharp, the single word coming out louder and almost angrier. Except that was silly, because Kamakura-kun didn't ever get angry. A heartbeat passed before he spoke again, monotone back, and Chiaki almost thought she'd imagined the vague surge of inflection. Enoshima very much wanted you dead. She had no hand in this. The tight feeling in her chest loosened.
Okay,
she said quietly, shakily.
Okay.
He'd never directly lied to her before. Omitted things, but not lied. It was a relief to hear her half-formed suspicion had been wrong. After the 2 betrayals from Yukizome-sensei and Sumiki-san, she didn't know if she could have handled a third. Especially not from him. Thinking their names dragged the associated memories back, and she swallowed.
So then, do you know why Sumiki-san and Yukizome-sensei?
They had already been brainwashed by Enoshima at the time they betrayed you. That's right. Enoshima had mentioned something like that, at least for her teacher. She remembered that now. A hollow pit opened up in her stomach. Yukizome-sensei must have been captured and brainwashed when she came to save Chiaki and Kameda-kun. She didn't know when Enoshima had gotten Sumiki-san, and that was arguably worse. The nurse might have been brainwashed for days, weeks, months, and she hadn't noticed.
And you call yourself class rep?
Trying to stave those thoughts off, she reached for another question, any other question.
What changed? What made you want to help me? The only time I spoke to you, you asked who I was.
I did, but although I did not know you, I was still drawn to you. I felt the urge to seek you out as you were dying. We spoke.
I don't remember that,
she stated in some surprise, sitting up. That is natural. Your brain was struggling for oxygen. It would not have had the energy to retain the memories of your near death. What you said and did. Here he paused, as if searching for the right words. How odd. Hesitance was something she'd never seen on him before. caused me to question Enoshima's ideals, and the entire ordeal lowered my opinion of her. I still find despair intriguing, but I am no longer associated with her. Chiaki got the feeling she should be proud of that. You sometimes got an achievement for swaying a major character away from the antagonist's side. But the sedative was working its way out of her system, and the calm was fading. Her regained memories were waving at her. Pain, guilt, regret, self-loathing, and sorrow were reasserting themselves, jabbing into her heart like 1,000 needles.
When you die, this video will throw all your classmates into despair.
Her hands clenched her bedsheets.
If I'd been stronger, smarter, if I hadn't been so stupid, my friends wouldn't have been brainwashed.
That was just the truth of it, plain and simple. They'd trusted her judgment, and she danced them into Enoshima's hungry jaws. She wasn't the protagonist who would save the day. She was a side character, delusional enough to think she was the hero when in reality, she was the one who made messes for them to clean up. Kamakura-kun seemed to be awaiting a response, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. A pause stretched out, past pregnant and into overdue. It was uncomfortable, nothing like the cozy quiet that sometimes hung over their meals together. Finally, when it became apparent she wasn't going to say anything else, he rose. She suddenly realized his suit was wrinkled, as if he'd been sitting at her bedside for hours. Now that you have regained your memories, you will begin attending additional therapy sessions, he said, for the good of your mental and emotional health.
Okay.
She agreed quietly, even though she didn't really care about her health. It wasn't worth a fight. That nasty little voice from before whispered that maybe she didn't even deserve to be well, and in that moment, when everything seemed so bleak, it was hard to find reasons to disagree with it. A hint of softness touched Kamakura-kun's face. Stay in bed until you feel well enough to leave. I will bring you something to eat. She was a little hungry, but Chiaki didn't feel like she could eat a single bite. Relieved to no longer be scrutinized, she made a slight noise of assent, and he left. But being alone with her thoughts wasn't much better than the earlier awkward atmosphere. It just meant she had less to distract her from every mean, whispered mental jab at how foolish she'd been. Seeking a distraction, Chiaki's gaze drifted blankly around the room to the window. The curtains were open, showing the red sky, a sight she'd already disliked. Now, with shame fresh in her veins, it was unbearable. She looked away, casting her eyes about until they fell upon her game girl Advance, sitting innocuously at her bedside table. She stared at the device for a long moment. The pink-haired girl slowly picked it up and flicked it on. The happy, bright colors and cheerful jingle of Gala Omega greeted her. Chiaki gazed at the screen with a slight frown, reminiscent. This was the one game she'd never played with her classmates, something she'd kept just for herself and Hinata-kun. They'd played other games too, of course, but this one was special. It was how they met, and it felt nice having something she shared only with him. Her eyes started to burn, because of course, once she thought about her time with Hinata-kun, she inadvertently thought about her time with her friends as well. The parties, the school activities, the field trips, especially the field trips. Sonia-san was always so eager to learn more about Japan, and Soda-kun would trip over himself volunteering to show her around, and Tanaka-kun would somehow blow him away with effortless theatrics. Now, those same friends were criminals without a future, because of her actions.
You weren't just a terrible friend to Hinata-kun. You were a terrible friend to your entire class. Someone like you was never fit to be class rep. You should have just stayed in your little bubble where you belonged.
Tears tried to escape the corners of her eyes, but she pressed her knuckles into the sockets, forcing them back. What right did she have to cry? She'd tried her best, and her best just wasn't good enough. Worse, her best had doomed everyone she loved. Her best had twisted Nidai-kun's loud speeches, and Koizumi-san's beautiful photos, and even Kameda-kun's hope. With a frustrated cry, she threw the Game Girl Advance across the room. The music came to an abrupt halt as the console broke against the wall, falling in pieces to the floor. Shaking under the force of the emotions and memories that just wouldn't stop assaulting her, Chiaki pulled the covers over her head, curled into a tiny ball, and desperately bit her lip to keep from screaming again. End of Chapter 9. Author's note. This was originally longer, but I liked where it ends here more. So now the original ending of this chapter is the first part of the next chapter. On the plus side, that means part of it's already written, which is good since I head back to college Monday. Medical and scientific studies show that people who have near-death experiences almost never remember the moment of quote-unquote dying. They can recall the events leading up to it, but not the actual impact. This is generally because of shock and lack of oxygen in their brains, making it unable to scribe the memories to the cerebral cortex. So Chiaki wouldn't remember getting impaled, fortunately for her, nor anything after it, including her talk with Izuru. It's less a mental block, like with her other ones, and more the memories just not being there, so she's never going to remember them either.